So one of the people commented on my last video telling me about Incan Gold. I saw it at the store. I decided to give it a try, and this is my daughter's new favorite game of all time. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best game you've ever played in your life, and 1 being the worst game you've ever played in your life, where would you rank this game?
10.
10. Wow. My son and daughter just played this for the first time today. They loved it. My daughter gave it a 10 without a second's hesitation. I'm going to go over why. We're going to talk about the game. Quick review. Let's get to it. Alright, so in this game, you and your fellow adventurers are exploring the ruins of an ancient Incan temple. You're looking for turquoise, obsidian, and gold. At every turn, you must decide whether to play it safe by returning to camp with the treasure you've gathered so far, or to be truly intrepid adventurer and keep on going. Going farther into the ruins means risking your treasure should you fall victim to the many hazards: giant spiders, wandering mummies, fire spouts, and venomous snakes. But priceless Incan artifacts are rumored to exist here, and you can be the one to discover them if you conquer your fears and forge ahead. What is your threshold for danger? How much treasure is enough for you? Find out by exploring Incan Gold. Alright, this is just going to be a real quick overview of what you're going to see in this video. So first we're going to start off with the components of the game, then I'll go through the setup real quick and how to play the game. That doesn't take too long at all. Then I'm going to go over the game strategy. So I have done a lot for this game strategy. I've got Excel worksheets I've printed out. I've done 100 different draw rolls just to answer the one question of how many cards does it take to get to the second hazard card in the game. I've done range, mean, median, mode, standard deviation. I've done an analysis. I've looked through all the forums online. There's not a whole lot out there, unfortunately, so I've had to kind of do my own research. I've used AI, I've used ChatGPT. I've done as much as I can to figure out the strategy of this game as quickly as possible without killing myself over it, because it is just a game and you're just supposed to be having fun. But I did try to figure out the best strategy for the game, and I'm going to go through all of that in my strategy segment towards the end of this video. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I am drinking Pete's dark roast coffee with a little bit of half and half and a little, like a half a teaspoon of Celtic salt of some kind. Oh, a little bit of sugar, like half a teaspoon of sugar. I got this mug off of Etsy. It's pretty cool. It says, "Before you ask, yes, I have so many games. No, they are not like Monopoly. Yes, I need them all. No, I haven't played them all. Yes, I spent a fortune on them. And no, I don't have a problem." So, components of the game, there are 5 temple cards that you use to make the game board. They're numbered 1 through 5. And you flip them over as the game goes on. There's 8 player meeples, 4 male and 4 female. 8 tent cards. There's 30 quest cards. There's treasure cards, hazard cards. There's 5 artifact cards. Their turquoise is worth 1, obsidian is worth 5, and gold is worth 10. Now to start with, each player takes 1 meeple and 1 tent. Tent is folded out and placed in front of the player. The temple consists of 5 cards. It's created in the center of the table, and the 5 artifact cards are placed face down, one under each of the temple cards, going from lowest to highest. So the number 5 artifact is placed under the number 1 temple card, number 7 under the number 2, etc., etc. The game is played in 5 rounds. The player with the most wealth and treasure value after the 5th round wins the game. The guide marks the beginning of the first round by turning over the corresponding temple card, starting with the card marked 1. The guide shows the artifact rumored to be in this part of the temple to all players and shuffles it into the quest cards, making the quest deck for this round. If an artifact is not discovered in its disclosure round, it stays in the deck and it may be found later in the game. In the 5 rounds of the game, each player has a choice. They're going to decide if they're going to go into the temple further, or if they're going to take all their treasure and go back home and go back to their tent. But that means they don't get any of the treasure that is still coming further on in the game. So as you go further down the temple, there's more treasures you can get, there's more artifacts you can get, but there's also a risk of hitting more hazards, and if you hit 2 of the same hazard back to back, then you're done. You get scared away, you leave all your treasure behind. So this is a press your luck game where the further you go down in the temple, the more treasure you can get, the more artifacts you might be able to get, but you also might get that other hazard, the second hazard. When you get your second hazard, then you're done. You lose everything that you went in there with. So if you leave early before that, then you're smarter, you're keeping your money, but you're not gonna be possibly getting as much as other people that keep going on. Each player secretly chooses if they are going farther into the temple or if they are leaving the temple to return to camp. One card says go further down into the temple, and the other card says go back to my tent. You pick which one you're gonna do, you place it face down, everybody reveals it at the same time, and then the people that are going back to their tents go back to their tents with all of the money that they're collecting, and the people that are going down into the temple draw the next card from the temple deck and you see what you get. As you're turning down the top card from the quest deck face up and you place it next to the last card drawn, you make a pathway of cards. So on this pathway you can see what hazards have been found so far, what treasures, you can go ahead and stack the treasures if you want, and then any artifacts that have been found so far, those should all be visible. If the next card you draw is a treasure, then the players have found treasure and it's divided equally among everybody that's still in the temple at that time. And if it can't be divided equally, then the remainder stays on the card to help with the next treasure card that comes out. So for example, if you start off with a treasure card of say 4 and there's 4 players in the game, then each player is going to get 1 turquoise for 1 point each. And then if your next treasure card is an 11, then each player is going to get 2 turquoise, 8 total, so then there's 3 left over. The 3 left over will go on that treasure card as a remainder for later on. If the card shows an artifact, so if you take the card from the top of the deck and it shows an artifact, the artifact stays on the path. It's worth extra points at the end of the game, but only to a player clever enough to get it safely back to camp. The only way you can take an artifact card with you is if you're the only one going back to camp in that round. So if 2 people choose to go back to camp in that round, the artifact stays where it is. If 1 person goes back to camp during that round, you can bring the artifact with you. If you're the last person in the temple and there's an artifact there, might be time to go ahead and go back so you can get that artifact. Because if you don't go back and that you get a hazard card, that artifact is going to be lost forever. If the card shows a red bordered hazard, one of 2 things will happen. If it's the first time you've seen that hazard, then no big deal, just watch out for the second time you see it. Because if you see it a second time, then the hazard happens and everyone gets scared away and you leave all your treasure behind. Now when that happens, if you get a second card of the same type, then that card is going to be taken out of the game, so you can tuck it under one of the numbered cards 1 through 5 if you like, but that card is just removed from the game completely, which makes it less likely for that card to come up again in a future round. And then a new round begins, and you keep going until all 5 rounds are completed. After the final round, the tents are opened, and all players count their treasures. Turquoise is worth 1, obsidian is worth 5, gold is worth 10, and then you count your artifacts. You add it all together. Whoever has the most wealth and treasure value wins. If the scores are tied, then the player with the most artifacts wins. And if it's still tied, then you share the victory and play again. All right, we've made it to the strategy segment of the video. So our goal for this is to find the best strategy for the game in as few and simple rules as possible, guidelines to follow, so that we can have the best chance of winning this game. So let's get to it. We're gonna go in standard military format, which is situation, background, assessment, and recommendations, SBAR format. So the situation is, should I stay or should I leave? That's what this is a push your luck game. So there's a risk reward situation we have going on. And there's a chance and a probability that we can figure out with math in order to figure out whether the risk is worth the reward. The background push your luck games are good because they are highly relatable to real life. For example, if you're taking a chance at asking a woman out on a date, you have the risk of being humiliated or the reward of maybe she'll say yes. If you are in a military situation, you have the risk of flying into dangerous airspace versus the reward of accomplishing your mission success, whether that's intel or whatever the case is. So in everything in life, whether it's military strategy or in just everyday life situations, it's a risk versus reward. They do it in business. It's in everything. A game like this prepares you for the real world, real life. Not only that, but it builds relationships with family and friends, everything like that. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's get into the strategy of this game. So situation, should I stay or should I leave? The assessment, how to decide whether to stay or to leave. We're gonna assess questions, answers, experiments, odds calculations, number of people in the game, and see what it tells us. And then I'll make a recommendation at the end as far as what I think the best guidelines and strategy are for this game. I'll try to go this real quick, but just feel free to pause the video or rewind if I'm going too fast, and let's get started. All right, so looking at the strategy of this game, the first thing I'll do is just kind of go in order of everything that I did looking at the strategy. There are 30 quest cards, 15 hazard, and 15 treasure cards. 3 of 5 different types of hazard cards. If you get the second hazard, then that's it. And what we're trying to figure out is the odds. So we know there's 30 cards total, plus you're gonna have one of these artifact cards added for each game. So I did some example runs and playthroughs with this, and I just used the one artifact card with 15 treasures and 15 hazard cards. So I did a play test. The first thing I did was a run through of this game. I did a full play test with 6 players, and I had player number 1. Each player had a different rule that they followed. So player number 1 always leaves after the first treasure card. Now, I did have some common sense rules, so if there was a reason why you wouldn't leave, like if there wasn't a single hazard that came up, then that player wouldn't leave. Player 1 would leave after the first treasure, player 2 would leave after the second treasure, player 3 would leave after the first hazard, player 4 would leave after the second hazard, player 5 leaves after the third hazard, player 6 only leaves when they're the last player. The game ended with player 5 winning with 54 points. Second place was player 6. Third place was player 2. The winning situation here was always leave after the third hazard, was the rule that won that game. Then I did an analysis to try and figure out how many cards does it take to get to the second hazard. So what I did was I took the deck, I put the 15 treasure cards in the deck along with the 15 hazard cards, and I put one artifact card in there. So I had a deck of 31 cards, and I shuffled them up, and I dealt out cards until I got to a second hazard card, and this is how many turns it took me: 6, 7, 3, 8, all the way through. I did 100 of those, and then I found the range. It was anywhere from 14 to 2 was the range, so range of 12. The mean, so the average was 6.63. The median was 6, the mode was 4, 11 times. And then did standard deviation over here. So standard deviation was 1.07. That gave me my average of 6.63 to say that it's gonna be between 6 and 7 cards on average that are gonna get you to that second hazard card. After your 6th or 7th card, that's a good time to start thinking, hey, maybe I should get out of here before my luck runs out. That being said, sometimes it would happen after only 2 or 3 or 4, and sometimes you'd go up to 14. So there is a wide range there, so keep that in mind. I did plot that out on a graph, made this little graph here for you. I also went on ChatGPT and I put in the rules of the game as best I could, and I'm not sure if I trust it because ChatGPT said it was like 5.6 was the average, and I got 6.6 when I did my math. So if anybody out there is good at math or statistics and probabilities, feel free to go ahead and check my math on this and see if you've got a better answer. 6 is the golden number because that's in between what ChatGPT said and what I got, 6.6, 5.6, so about 6 as the average number of cards it takes to get to your second hazard. So that's just something that's good to know to keep in the back of your mind. Another thing that I did was I went through and I played another game, this time with 8 players, and I changed the rules a little bit. I took the 2 worst rules from up here, I got rid of those,
and I went to some new rules. So player 1 leaves after the second treasure, player 2 leaves after the third treasure, player 3 leaves after the second hazard, player 4 leaves after the third hazard, player 5 leaves after the fourth hazard, player 6 leaves when the last card is the 6th card in the deck. So this is where I was using that 6 or 7 cards. And player 7 leaves after the 7th card was drawn in the deck, and then player 8 leaves when they're the last player. And I played that, and it was a much lower scoring game, as you can see, because there's more players, so all of the treasure cards have to be divided amongst more people. And the winner of this game was, again, the player that leaves after the third hazard, the same as up here, but it was a tie with the player that left after the 7th card. They each had 12. And that was interesting that now we have 2 good observations. One is that 6 seems to be the average number for the second hazard. The other observation is that in general, if you want to just play with an easy rule, then always leaving after the third hazard seems to be the winning rule so far in the games that I play tested here. So another good thing to note when you're playing the odds and you're calculating the odds for this game is, on average, if you get a gem card, how valuable is that gem card going to be? Obviously, it's going to change a little bit if you've already seen a 17 gem card or if you've seen a 1 gem card. So I calculated the odds difference between those. The average number of gems to get, so you have 124 total gems on the 15 cards, so that gives you about 8 gems per card. Now if the number 1 card is gone, that brings you down to 123 over 14, which is about 9 gems per card. Whereas if the number 17 card is gone, that brings you down to 7.6. So really 7.6 to 9 on your worst 2 case scenarios. On average, you're pretty much coming out to 8 gems. So I think a good rule of thumb is just to call it 8. On average, if a gem card comes out, just count on it being an 8. It's kind of like the rule in blackjack. When you're studying the odds for blackjack, you just assume that the dealer always has a 10. So in this game, we're just going to assume that the treasure card that comes out next is always going to be an 8. That's going to help us with our odds calculation on deciding what to do next. Let me see if there's a couple other observations. High player count equals low scores. That's something important to note, because if you get an artifact card that comes up, artifacts are going to be much more valuable and much more important the larger the amount of players you have in the game. If you're only playing with 3 or 4 players, these have less importance, whereas if you're playing with 8 players, this is going to be a huge swing in the game, because with 8 players, it's going to be a lower scoring game to begin with. So these are going to be a huge swing. 8-player game, 7-player game, 6-player game, these are much more valuable. Now we're going to talk about a little math I did right here. If you have, this is the deck, this is if you have an artifact card here. I'll just kind of go through this real quick so you can see it better. So you've got the deck, you've got all these treasure cards, all of these hazard cards, and then you've got 1 artifact card thrown in here. So we're looking at hazards right now. So let's pick 5 hazards that are different for our example. The flame hazard, there we go. So we've got the 5 different hazards. We're going to go over, if each one of these comes up, let's say that you had a good card to begin with, so wanting to know whether you should leave with a bunch of money or not. Let's say the 17 card came up first, and so that gave everybody 4 players in the game here in this situation. So each one of them would have, let's see, 416 would be 4 each. So each one has 4. So each player has 4, and we're trying to decide whether or not we should leave. So the first card comes up, that's a hazard card. I've got these 5 hazard cards here, so we'll play with these on the top of the deck. So the first card that comes up is a hazard card. The chances now that the next card is going to be a hazard card, we'll look here. So if the first one's a hazard, that means that there's 2 more of that hazard. There's 2 more spiders in the deck that could come up out of the 31 total cards that were here. Well, for this math, it's all going to be pretty much the same. If you have a couple extra artifacts, or if this card wasn't here and you're just looking at the hazard card in general, it's going to be a minute difference. So let's just use my numbers that I've got here. So the first hazard would be 2 out of 30 chance. That's if this card wasn't here. So it'd be 2 out of 30 chance because we have 1 card here. So here we've got 2 cards, so really it would be 2 out of 29, but it's going to be so close, it doesn't matter. The chance that the next card is going to be a hazard is a 6.7% chance that the next card is going to be a spider, right? So then let's flip over the next card. Next card's another hazard. We've got the zombie there, or the mummy. I mean, if the next card's a mummy, now we've got 2 spiders and 2 mummies out there. that are possible bad cards for us. So now we've got a 4 out of 29, so it comes out to 13.8% chance that the next card is going to be a bad card for us. If we keep going and we get a fire, now we've got 6 out of 28, or a 21% chance. The fourth hazard is going to be 8 out of 27 for a bad card, so a 29.6% chance that the next card's bad. And if we have the fifth card out there, that's the rock slide, that's also a hazard. So now we've got all 5 hazard cards out here. The chance that the next card is a hazard card is still less than 50-50. You've got a 10 out of 26 chance, so that's 38.5% chance that the next card is going to be a bad card. So what's that tell us? It tells us that the odds are still better that we're not going to die on the next card. Now, the gameplay was a little bit different. The gameplay said that after the third hazard, leaving was a good idea. So what we found here is that after the fifth hazard, you still have a better chance of not getting a hazard, or not getting a duplicate hazard, versus getting an actual treasure card. So now we know the probability. We have to determine the risk versus reward. So the risk versus reward is going to be, how much money do you have to lose? That's the risk. How much money are you going to lose versus what's the reward that you're going to get if you gain? So in this situation here, if there's 4 of us playing and we assume that the next card, if it's a treasure card, it's either going to be treasure or it's going to be bad and kill us, right? So if it's a treasure card, if it's a good card, it's going to give us 8. So that's going to be 2 for each one of us. Whereas we have a risk of losing 4. So is the risk of losing 4 versus the chance, the better chance of gaining 2, is that better? And you can figure that out with math. And the equation is actually pretty simple. The equation is right here. So I wrote it out. Odds of calculation for the temple is going to be the probability times the risk of losing money. So the risk, so the amount of money that you could lose. So in this situation, we found the probability for all 5 of these cards is 38.5%. And we're going to times that by what we're going to lose. So 4. And then we're going to see if that, add that to the probability. So it's going to be a -4 because we're losing 4. And then we're going to add that to the probability of getting the reward, which will be a gain of 2. So if we were to write that out, we would use the percentages that we have here. So 38.5%, so let's just call that 39%, times we're losing 4, add that to, so 61% times 2. So we'll do the math on that really quickly. Times 4 equals 1.56, or 1.22. And then you just look at which number is bigger, right? Or you call this a negative and you add them together. Either way you do it, if this is a negative number, do you end up with a negative number? If you end up with a negative number, if the t is negative, then you run. If the t is positive, then you stay. What if they all run away and then you stay and you get 8 all to yourself? Well, now it's changed, and that's what's important to know about this, is the probability of this, the part on the left, the equation on the left over here, this is always going to be the same. This is going to be a known probability, whereas this over here, this chance is going to change because your reward is unknown. Your reward could change depending on what the other players do. So knowing what the other players are likely to do in this game is huge. So reading the other players is huge, but we can still know what the probability is in a range. So that's easy to do also. So you take this second number over here that you got and you change the gain. So now, instead of, it's going to be a range between that and 61% of 8. So we'll times it by 8 and then we'll see what we get. So what's 61% of 8? So 8 times 0.61, it's going to be 4.88. So 4.88 is much bigger. It's a much bigger number than that one. So now that probability says, hey, we should go for it. So knowing what your opponents are likely to do is huge. If you know they're all probably going to run you could make out by staying, that's going to be a much bigger idea. So knowing the odds will help you out a lot. Knowing what the other players are going to do is going to help you out just as much, if not more. And then looked at whether or not the treasure cards have an effect on your odds. I did that really quick just to see what the difference was. So say your first card was a hazard, then you're going to end up with a 6.7% chance that the next card is going to be one of the bad duplicate hazards of that first card. If your next card is a treasure card, treasure, as they keep going, second treasure, it only goes up a little bit to 6.9% chance, 7.1% chance. Really, if you used all 16 treasure cards with the one hazard, you would still only be at a 14% chance that the next card is going to be the bad hazard card that matches the one that you had up in the first place. The odds say, don't worry about the treasures. The only thing you need to worry about counting is the hazard. Guideline rule, never leave after the first hazard. It's such a low chance that you're going to have to worry about that. Maybe sometimes leave after the second hazard, maybe on average leave after the third hazard, sometimes maybe stay to the fourth hazard, and rarely should you ever stay till the fifth hazard. That would be a general guideline or rule of thumb if you didn't want to worry about calculating the odds. Final analysis of the game is that it is a high luck game, and even with good luck mitigation strategy, it's still going to be a decent amount of luck in this game. But the strategy is definitely going to help you if you know the idea of how to play, and the strategy is going to be just like if you're going to play poker or blackjack at a casino. Knowing the odds, knowing what you should do in certain situations is going to give you a leg up on people that don't know that and are just winging it. But it's still a high luck game. It's going to be important to read your opponents. Knowing whether or not they're going to leave or they're going to stay is important, and so also bluffing in this game is important. So you don't want them to have a read on you. You don't want them to know whether or not you're going to leave or you're going to stay. Try not to give that away, just like if you're playing poker. So read your opponents. Also know your table. So if you're playing with a group of people that you know are very tight, very conservative players, just like if you're playing poker, you want to play on the looser side. So be a little bit more daring and more risk-taking. And if they're all playing conservative, then you're more likely to win because of that. Same thing with if you're playing with a group that's very loose. If they're all going to the very end, then you want to be leaving right before they do. So when they all get that scare card, the second hazard card, they're all done. They all lose all their money, and you still kept a little bit of yours. So if you're playing on a tight table, play loose. If you're playing at a loose table, play tight. Average hand. So I did an analysis here where if you have an average number of players being 4 versus being 8, and what that does if you have, here's the deck. So you have hazard, treasure, hazard, treasure, hazard, treasure. And if half the people leave on the second hazard, what that does to you, and then what your risk mitigation strategy is here, basically comes out to if you have 4 players versus 8 players, it doesn't matter when it comes to the odds. For the 4-player game, in this situation, we ended up with a risk of -4 and a reward of +4 in this situation, versus for the 8-player game, you had a risk of -2 for a reward of +2. So the only thing to take of note here is that in a lower scoring game with more players, the odds are the same, but your artifact cards, as we talked about before, are going to be much more valuable by comparison, twice as much, because you've got twice as many players, so twice as powerful. Final analysis. So risk versus reward. So for average number of gems before the second hazard break, so it would be about 50%. So the total number of gems that are going to come out before the second hazard comes out. So if the second hazard's going to come out on average by the 6th card, you would get a spider or a double rock slide for your 6th card. On average, you would have 2 other treasure cards in here, and each treasure card would be about an 8. If you've got 3 8s out here, by the time the last hazard comes on a 4-player game, that would be 24 divided by 4, so you'd have 6 gems in a 4-player game on average. In a 4-player game, if you ever have more than 6 gems, you're doing better than normal, and it might be a good time to go ahead and take your winning and leap. In an 8-player game, it would be half of that. So in an 8-player game, if you ever get to where you've got 3 gems, then that's probably pretty good. That's about average. If you have more than 3, then maybe you should go ahead and take that and leave. Count yourself lucky. Odds based on color. So I did a deep dive analysis to see if these meeples, I don't want there to be any difference in race or gender or color. So if you notice, there's not even any white meeples, so we don't have to worry about that kind of horrible racism that we have there. So these are just all of the rainbow colored meeples. So even though there's only 2 genders in the meeples, they still represent the rainbow. So that should please a good portion of the gamers out there. I'll be happy to hear that. Another good strategy is to be braver than most, but not braver than all. So maybe be the second bravest out of everybody. You won't want to go all the way into the cave, but maybe be the second most. So remembering which hazards are gone from the game. So this is going to be huge because you have 5 rounds in the game, and during these rounds, one of the hazards might come up double, and then that hazard's gone. So knowing if that hazard's gone, and if the rocks come up again, then you know that there's only 1 instead of 2 sets of those rocks that could possibly come out. And if that happened with maybe the snake also, so now you've got 2 hazard cards, which are going to scare most people. But if you're the one that remembers that, hey, we already lost a snake and a rock in previous rounds, then you know that this is only half as dangerous. This is like staring at 1 card instead of 2. Also knowing if there's lots of artifacts, always go for the artifact. If there's an artifact out there on the board, always go for it. Hopefully you know the other players, what they're likely to do. You want to make sure that you're the one that ends up with the artifact, not one of them. Artifacts are a huge swing in this game, and they can make or break the game. Can you find the Easter eggs? Can you find the little jokes that I throw in here and there in my YouTube channel? Let me know if you see them. If you're the last player, that's another good question. So if everybody else already ran away and you're the last player and you're trying to figure out, should you go one more just to try and get that extra treasure? Maybe. It depends on how much you've already got. But if you've got anything at all that you're going to risk losing, I would say leave unless you know who's winning. You don't have to keep track of how much everybody has, but if you have a general idea of who's winning, how much they have compared to how much you have, if you just keep track of are you winning or are other people winning, then you know if you have the most gems. If you have the most gems, then if you're the last player in the dungeon, you should definitely leave. But if you're not winning and you know somebody else is in the lead, then if you're the last person in the dungeon, maybe going for that 1 or 2 extra cards could really bring you back into the lead because you know you're getting everything. If you get 2 treasure cards, that's 8 plus 8, that's 16 points really quick right there. Take notes of remainders on cards. Don't forget that if you have a remainder on cards, especially when you're playing with large groups, so if you've got 8 players and you've got seven gems on 1 card because there's 8 players in the game and half of those players leave, that's a good number of gems that are going to be passed around to anybody that stays. So keep an eye on the remainders on there. Has a bigger impact for the higher player count games. I'll put a bullet point right after this that goes over the most important strategies that we just went over that you need to take away from this in order to play your best and hopefully win at Incan Gold. I'm almost at 500 subscribers, and I will be doing another game giveaway for the 500 subscriber mark. I'll have a video about that coming out soon. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best game you've ever played in your life, and 1 being the worst game you've ever played in your life, where would you rank this game?
10.
10. Wow. Best game you've ever played? 5. So medium. All right. That was pretty good. Pretty good score from Charlie. Charlie's new favorite game.
Say, I want to say. I got a favorite.
All right. Charlie, what's your favorite thing about the game?
The monsters.
The monsters. Really? All right. Dirk, what's your favorite thing about the game?
Getting jewelry.
Jewelry? You mean jewels? Max, did you like the game? Did you play the game? No. Was Mommy playing the game?
Yeah.
Who won the game?
Cute.
That's right. Mommy won the game. So yay, Mommy. How many did Mommy get?
31.
31, because she was the bravest one of all. All right. Looks like it's a winner. Incan Gold is a relatively simple game to learn, but its strategic depth can be quite interesting. Shit, I didn't have the freaking
All right, let me get the microphone. So everything before this segment was without a freaking mic.